So it's lesson 3, part 2. We've created a genres table in the database. We created a form which we copied and pasted from Blackboard, and a save page that will save and some of us are having trouble with our AWS connections. And if we need to work locally for today, that's absolutely fine. So I've used our new form and save page. If you need to reference the code, it is on GitHub. So I've used it so that I can create some genre records in the database. We now are going to recreate the movies table from last week that we had in our local database, but I've made 1 or 2 changes to it. So there's another script we're going to execute in Workbench here on Blackboard. If we have time, Belinda, we definitely will, but I don't know we're going to get to it today. Yeah, absolutely. We will do some formatting with Bootstrap. You can do whatever CSS you want. I'm going to use Bootstrap, but I don't know if we'll have time today. I hope so, but with the amount of debugging, that may not happen. We'll see. We'll get to it eventually. So there's another script on Blackboard. We're going to create the movies table now in our AWS database. So I'm going to copy this script. It says lesson 3 SQL script 2. It's the same script we ran last week in our local database, but there's a couple of additions. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go back to Workbench. And I'm going to paste in this script. So what's going on here? We're creating the movies table, and it looks similar to what we did last week. We had a movie ID, a title, a rating, a release year. I've added 3 additional things here. One is an optional image. We're going to leave that out for now, but later in the class, later in the term, we want to be able to upload a movie poster. So it can be null. So notice it doesn't have this not null designation. We've also got a genre ID. And then this code, I know you probably haven't dealt with it yet in your database class. Foreign key, genre ID, references, genres ID. Yes, Andres, if we have time, we'll do that later today, but we may not have time. So what's happening here? What do you suppose this genre ID int not null and this foreign key, what does this mean? Yes, Andres, that's what we're doing. We're using the local web server, but the AWS database. Yes, Shashank, so the genre ID can't be null. What is this line? What do you think's happening here? You'll cover this in your database class. Yeah, that's right. The foreign key connects the 2 together. So we're saying every movie must have a genre ID, but that genre ID has to belong in the genres table, right? So they're linked together. So I've got genre ID 1, 2, and 3. So this line means anytime we create a movie, it must have a genre ID of 1, 2, or 3, right? I can't have genre ID 800 here because that genre doesn't exist. So it's almost like a parent-child relationship. And you'll learn more about this in your database class. So genre acts like the parent. Every movie must have a parent. You can't create a movie without assigning it to a genre. Okay, so I'm going to execute this script. I'm going to highlight the lines I just copied and pasted from Blackboard. I'm going to create the movie table. And I will start the IDs at 1000. So I'm going to click the execute button. and I get 2 green checks. It created my movies table and then altered it so that the IDs will start at 1,000. So we'll come back to this table in a little bit. Okay, so again, that script was here on Blackboard. And you'll be learning how to write these scripts in your database class, but for now, I'm just going to provide them to you. So similar table to last week with 2 additional columns, image and genre ID, and then this foreign key, this link to the genres table we just built. Yeah, exactly. The foreign key is the link. It's the connection. So this will tell us which genre each movie is in. So that way we could filter on our website, right? We can say, I want to see only the comedies. So we use this genre ID and the foreign key to allow us to filter the movies for a specific genre. Yeah, we will do. Hamid, when you say create a table, you mean a table in the database or a table for display in the browser? Well, no, we don't want the tables in the PHP code because the PHP code, remember, it doesn't persist. As soon as you leave a page, all the code is gone. It's not, there's no permanent storage. So the permanent storage is the database. So this is why we want the data in the database, because the PHP is temporary. It only exists for the life cycle of your page. As soon as you leave the page, all the data that's in there is gone. Does that make sense? Well, if the table doesn't exist, then what we should do is we need to create the table in the database. That's exactly what we're doing here. We need to create the table in the database first as a place to hold the data. And then we write the PHP code to capture data in the browser and save it to the database. So our PHP, it's not for data storage. It's for sending and retrieving data into the data storage, which is our database. Make sense? Okay. Very good question. So I've got a few genres here. Now what we want to do is try to read and display the genres out on a web page. So we've got 2 pages that save data to the database. We've got save genre we just made, and we have save movie. So we're going to make a new page here called genres.php. And we'll put on our basic HTML. So we've worked on saving data from the browser into the database. But many of the dynamic pages we want need to do the opposite. We need to retrieve data from the database and display it to users in the browser. And that's what we want to do here. So there's a few steps involved with this. We'll put on all the comments first. We're going to connect first. We're going to set up an SQL query to fetch the genres. We'll execute the query. and store the results. So typically when we're selecting a bunch of records from the database, we use this same process over and over again. So the kind of loop, the code we're going to write here, you're going to write many, many times through the course. Many of the pages in our site are going to have to select some kind of information from the database and display it in the browser. So this process is very repetitive. We're going to do it for the first time now, but we're going to do it over and over and over again. So our connection to the database is the same. So I'm going to put in my same connection. Which I'll make sure to end with a semicolon. In case I get any kind of database error, I'm going to turn on the database debugging as well. Because this will make it a little easier to spot and fix a problem if there is one. So we want to display any PDO errors. The SQL query we want to run, it's actually the same SQL query that I ran in Workbench. So Josh, and you asked, how do I see the data in Workbench? Right? And we use that query select star from genres. We're going to use the same query here. So when we run this query in Workbench, it gives me 3 genres, 1, 2, and 3, comedy, drama, sci-fi. So we want to show this same data in our web page, so we're going to use the same query. Again, we'll use prepare our command on our database. So far, this is pretty repetitive. It's pretty similar to our save pages, isn't it? The only thing that's different is the SQL instruction is a select. We're reading data instead of an insert. But the other 3 lines, they're identical. Doesn't matter if we're saving new data or reading existing data, we're doing the same thing. We don't have any parameters here because we're not filtering the list. We just want everything in the table. So now we can execute our query. So this actually runs the query in the database. But we want to retrieve, we need to fetch data out of the database now and store it so that we can display it in this web page. So I'm going to create a variable here called genres. And our SQL command has a method called fetch all. So this returns an array. So this is going to give us all of the results of our SQL query. And we're storing them in a variable called genres. And now we can use a loop structure in PHP so that we can display each genre on the page. So we're going to loop through our genres, and we'll call each one genre singular. So genres. So genres refers to our query result, and genre is one as we're looping through. And now what if we just want to print out the genre name? We can use our echo command. So this should print across the screen all of the data, all of the names from the genres table. Okay, so a lot of what's here we've already done up till here. The new parts are that we're calling fetch all, that returns an array of result sets. And then we're using a for each. I know you would have used for each loops in your Java course last semester. So you're familiar with, would be familiar with how a loop works. Well, you don't actually have to remember it. You just have to practice it. Right? This is a skill like any other skill. It's like learning to play the guitar or learning how to ski. Right? You're not going to learn it by somebody telling you how to do it and you listening and trying to remember. Right? The only way to get good is to practice. So the more you do this, the more you will understand the mechanics of it. The other thing that actually helps is getting errors because the errors help you learn how the code actually works. So as we make errors and we learn how to fix them, that actually helps you get better and better. I mean, that's a great question and we will try it. If we don't write fetch all, we run our query, but the data is never stored. It doesn't get stored anywhere, so we have no way to access it so we can display it. So this runs a select, it executes the query, but the data doesn't go anywhere. It just like goes into a vacuum. So the fetch all is required in order to access the query result. I wouldn't say it's so much as like a refresh. It's more like going to the grocery store and putting items in your cart and going to the checkout line and then just walking out the door without your cart and without paying. Right? You've got a bunch of food, but you're just kind of abandoning it. So without fetch all, we are running the query, but we're ignoring the results of the query. We're not doing anything with it. So the fetch all, we need to put it into some local variable so we can access the data in our PHP code. Right? So this is taking the data from Workbench and it's storing this little grid I've got here. It's taking this data and storing it in this variable. So if we skip this step, if we don't call fetch all and store it in a variable, the data, it's just gone. So let's look at what happens now if I load the genres page in my browser, and then we can play around with it. So I'm just going to go straight to genres.php, and now it prints out displays our data. It displays it badly, but whatever's in my table is now being dynamically shown on the page. This is how a dynamic web page works. Right, we talked about this back in our first class. We looked at a whole bunch of websites And we said most of the content is dynamic and lives in a database. So how do we get content out of the database? We connect to the database. We set up the instruction of which table we want to query from. We run the command. We store the results, and then we use a loop to output it. So there's two methods. We'll use fetch all when we want a list of data. There's also a method called fetch for retrieving a single record. So later on, when we want to look up one movie, instead of calling fetch all, we'll just call fetch, where we want one record. Where we're getting a list of data, we're going to use fetch all. Andres, you absolutely could use a \n, but because this is a web page, we actually could use HTML instead. So we've got a few options here. So if you want to put in a /n, that will just put it to the next line. What kind of HTML tags could we use to format our list better? Yeah, we could use UL and LI. Okay, some errors here. Belinda, undefined variable means you may be missing a semicolon on the previous line. Right, if I do this, it says it's unexpected. So if I save, right, unexpected variable, that's because I'm missing a semicolon here. Hamid, you have an extra D in the word prepare. There's no, yours says prepared, there's no D on the end. So the method name is prepare. Okay, the other possibility, if it's crashing here, is that your database connection might be failing. So if your connection doesn't work, you can't use it. Here, we're using the database to create a command. So double check your database connection. Make sure that it's the same. If it's working on one of your other pages, make sure it works here. Okay, Josh, and there is no $sign here. This is a literal string. MySQL is not a variable. This is the name of the database driver we're using. So there's no $sign here. I mean, keep in mind that's a dash and a greater than, and they have to be together. Okay, you've got a variable called MySQL. I don't have that variable. Mine is only called SQL. So Josh, and you may have called the variable MySQL somewhere, maybe here. Linda, I may have to look at it after if those things don't fix it. So now I want to, let's say I want to change this to, I think it was Sarah who suggested, yeah, let's use a UL and LI. So before our loop, let's echo a UL tag, just an opening tag. right? We want to open a list, and after our loop, let's close it. And then we want to wrap each genre name in an li tag, and this will give us a list. Okay, Spencer, so that's on the save page. Okay, good for you, Belinda. See, that debugging actually helps you learn. Spencer, you can check your code with mine on GitHub because it's posted. So now before each genre name, I'm going to open an li tag, and then we are going to append the genre name, and then we'll close the li tag. Yep, common mistake, right? Because this syntax is really weird. And we do use that equal sign. So if I refresh the page now, it should look better. So now we get a little bulleted list. So as we're looping through, we're also using some HTML. So our data, it's a combination. We're using HTML for styling and not for styling, for formatting. And we are injecting values from the database inside our list tags. If I view the page source, right, here's our list. We get our UL, and then each genre is displayed as a new li tag. So this is just one way that we might kind of use HTML formatting to display a dynamic list of data. Sarah, don't worry about it for now. That's right, Hamid. We will often write echo inside the PHP. Sarah, we'll deal with delete in a few weeks. Okay, Mark, when you create the first li tag, my code editor, and probably yours, it automatically closes the tag. So you may just have a second tag in there. Yeah. So displaying lists this way with UL and LI, that's one common way of displaying a list of data. We're going to do two other ways to display lists of data today. How else do we commonly see lists presented on a web page? Using UL and LI is one way. How else might dynamic data be presented? Yeah, exactly. So something like this, right? Here is a dynamic dropdown, right? It shows me all of the Blackboard shells that I have access to. So this is a query from a database, right? If another instructor like Scott logs in and clicks this, it's going to show him a different list, right? It will show him his courses. So this is just a list in a loop where we are populating options in the dropdown. We're going to do this later today so that when we add a movie, we can put the genres into a dropdown list and embed it inside the movie form. So we've got dropdowns, we've got regular lists. The other thing that's quite popular, Okay, so if you're getting unclosed, that's a bracket problem. So we've got lists. And very commonly, we have data tables. You have a square bracket at the end of the echo command. There's no square bracket there. So often we show a grid of rows and columns. So we want to be able to display our movies in a grid and our genres in a dropdown. Now I'm going to add one more genre through my form, and we'll see when we do that this page should get updated, right? It's dynamically showing us whatever's in the genres table. So if we go back to our form, right now I've got comedy, drama, and sci-fi. So if I go to genre details, I could add a new genre using my form. I want to save this to the database, and then I want to refresh my genres page, and I should now have 4 items in the list instead of the 3 that were there previously. So I'm going to save. And now if we want to check that in fact our new genre is here, I can go back here. And now our page, we can see it's updating dynamically. So every time we load this page, it goes and reruns the query here. It executes the select query, which now has 4 genres instead of 3. So we've used UL and LI to wrap or present our query result, but this isn't our only option. So this page should always show an up-to-date representation of what information is in the database. This is the way all dynamic web pages work. If you go to Instagram and you look up someone's profile, it shows you the current list of posts in that person's profile. So dynamic web pages are always showing us exactly what's in the database at that exact moment that we load the page and request the data. So we want to use this same query and embed it in our movie page so that when we're adding a movie, we can also fetch the list of genres from the database and allow our user to pick one to attach to each movie. So if we go and look at our movie details from last week, we want to add here another section in our form for genre, but instead of a text box where the user could type anything they want, we want to let them pick from a list like this one. So let's go and open the movie details page. We'll open it in our code editor. And in our browser, you can go to movie-details. And we're going to add in that genre query so we can add a drop-down list here. I will open up my movie details page from last week. We're going to add on to this page, and then we're also going to have to modify our save page so that when we save a movie, we're also saving the genre that it's attached to. So I'm going to make a new field set and a label. But instead of an input tag, I don't want a text input. What HTML tag do we need here to create a drop-down list? Input is just going to give me a text input where the user can type what they want. Thank you, Mark. So let's add a select tag, and we must give it a name. This is a common mistake with select tags. People forget. All our inputs have names. Our drop-down needs a name as well. So I'll just save that for now. There's our field set with our label and our select tag. So if I refresh my movie form, right now I get a little drop down, but there's nothing in it yet. So what we want to do is we want to fill this drop-down list dynamically from the database, right? Whatever genres are in the database, we want them to show up in this list. So if we add a genre or we delete a genre, the list will be up to date in real time at all times. So we're actually going to write PHP code inside the opening and closing select box so that we can go and fetch the data and create the items in our list. So the code that we're going to use, it's actually almost identical to here. We're going to connect. Yes, select is the HTML tag for a dropdown. There's no tag called dropdown. It's called select. We're going to run the same query. We want to get the list of genres. All this code is going to be the same. So Belinda, I'm making you practice. Right? Sometimes, especially when we're learning, some repetition is helpful. We're going to loop, but this time we're not going to use UL and LI. We're going to use a different kind of HTML formatting around the genre names. But a lot of this code, we're going to reuse a lot of what's here. So we'll open our PHP tags here, open and close. And we will connect. Yeah, Andres, it is because it kind of mixes the code and the HTML, which I personally don't love. Next semester, when we work with ASP.NET, the separation is much better. Well, there shouldn't be anything in your select yet. And again, we'll turn on our debugging. We're writing the exact same query that we used on our last page. Linda, I'm not quite sure what you mean it won't close the tag. And we'll set up our command by calling prepare, okay, not prepared with a D. Okay. So see, this is starting to get repetitive. We're using the same connection. We're preparing a command. We're reusing this same SQL query. Again, we'll call fetch all to run the query and store the results. So now we want to loop through and we want to add each genre to our list. I will push, or almost due for a break, we'll finish this page and then I'll push this code up to GitHub. So you can catch up if you're a bit behind. Oh, thank you, Hamid. Nice catch. It's nice to have 30 people helping you debug your code. Yes, if we don't call execute, our query will never run. And we'll get an error saying like genres is cannot call fetch all on a null object. Thank you. Yeah, I've been doing this a long time and I still forget stuff like that. Yep, I post it. I will post it when we take a break. I'll post it every time we take a break. I'll post what we've been doing. Yep, that's okay. I know for some people to listen and code at the same time, for some people that strategy doesn't work very well. That's why these are recorded. So you may, depending on your learning style, may be best to just sort of watch the lesson and then go ahead and use the videos later where you can hit stop and rewind. That works better for some people. That's totally fine. So yeah, it happens. So now we're going to print out an option tag. We're going to do this in pieces. And then inside of each option tag, we're going to display the genre name. So on our last page, we were wrapping them in LI tags. This time we're going to wrap the genres in option tags. Options are for the items inside of a select list. And then after the loop, we'll just disconnect. I'm going to upload this code in just a minute. Okay, so here's our everything that's new from line 22 down to 41. I'm just going to load the page in my browser. We can see how this looks. It's down. So now I've got a drop-down list with all of the genres in the database. So whenever I go to create a movie, I have the ability to attach it to a genre. Now it won't save yet. The form part is done. Right, so whenever we fill a drop-down list, actually there is one more thing we'll have to do with this, but we'll do it after we take a break. So we're using the same query, but we're just packaging it, we're formatting it with option and select, unlike on this page where we formatted it with UL and LI. But the mechanics of our query is exactly the same. Query the database. Tyler, yeah, it is, if you wanted to. So if you wanted to have like a default option, I'm going to leave it out for now. You could just hard code in. I'll show you what it would look like, although I'm not going to save it in mind. So you could do something like this, right? Before the PHP, you could just hard code in something like this if you wanted to. I'm going to leave that out for now. I might add it in later, but just for simplicity, I'll keep it out. So then this would appear before the list of options from our query. Good question. Yes, we're Spencer, we are, because we're going to have to modify the save movie anyway, right? Because the save movie page, it doesn't include, it will ignore this, right? There's no reference to genre ID because we didn't have it last week. This is why we rebuilt the table this week and included genre ID. So we are going to have to change the save movie page. We're going to update the connection. And then we're also going to have to add in the saving of the genre ID. So yes, we're going to need to do that. So there's one more thing we will have to do with this form, but we'll do it after we take a break. If it's not working, then Belinda, what I recommend in your form, in the browser, view the source, and if there's an error, it'll show you in here why it's not filling the options. So if there's a problem with the query, it will show you in the source here. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here. I'm going to upload again to GitHub, and I need to go step away for a few minutes. We will come back at 10:05.